Okay, so we're going to have a little think in this series of videos about the role of social media and whether or not it's a conduit for criminality. Now, social media is something that we're going to look at because it is one of the key focal points of our activities at the moment. In the introductory session, I flagged up that things like email was a subset of computer media communications, and that social media is a subset of computer media communications, but social media is somewhere that we spend a lot of time at the moment. Okay, so social media and social networks, and there's a slight difference in emphasis there. So social media, you might think in terms of things like Instagram and YouTube, where there's the emphasis on the media, and social networks, you may think of things like Facebook or Tinder or whatever, okay, where the emphasis is on the networking. But there's an overlap of features and an overlap of functions that you'll find in many of these platforms. So what you can do is find a working definition for social media and social networks if you're going to write about them in detail. But just briefly in terms of social media, let's remind ourselves that social media, okay, are important to us. And it fits in with some of the key themes of the module, which is where we're thinking about the fact that we're looking at high-tech crime. So we're looking at it from a global perspective, right? So that global perspective is important, and that we have networks that cross a lot of the traditional jurisdictional boundaries, geographic and political boundaries. And that's important. That has got implications for us as users and potential victims, and for those who are looking to carry out criminal activities on those networks. So the internet, the international network, the World Wide Web, we can talk about it sometimes in terms of it being cyberspace or virtual reality and things like that, but there's a reminder to ourselves that behind the so-called cyberspace and virtual reality, okay, behind all this stuff, there is a big physical infrastructure, and that's important, especially in terms of certain types of computer-related crimes that we will look at as part of this module. It's also got important implications because of how that technology is distributed within the wider population and how people have got access to it. But the general rule is that more and more people have got access to the technology, and it's becoming to some extent ubiquitous. We don't necessarily notice the technology's there. Okay, so we use our mobile phones and devices. There are wireless networks, but there's also wired networks. There are satellites, there are undersea cables, there's all kinds of things that support the fact that you can post a picture on Instagram, that you can message your friend whether they're down the road or on another continent. Okay. A reminder too that behind the technology, okay, behind all the interfaces, behind everything else that we're going to look at, is people. People are very important. Yeah? People both as victims and perpetrators. So whilst the module is focused on technology, and we'll talk a lot about technology, and we'll keep thinking about these global international dimensions, okay, it's ultimately about people. And it's the technology designed to make it easy for people to communicate. The engineers behind the systems, the people who've designed this stuff, are kind of going, well, how can we make it really easy for people to communicate? How can we make it easy for people to share information? And indeed, Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the World Wide Web, expressed it along the lines of, well, we want a system that says, give me gobbledygook, and the system will give you gobbledygook, and it will spread it around nice and easily. And the people who worked on the protocols for the internet were looking at things like the Transmission Control Protocol, TCP, the Internet Protocol, IP. Luckily, you don't need to understand any of that, okay? But what they were looking at is how can we share data, okay, easily. And by data, I just mean digital information. What they were less concerned with were what was in that data, what made it up, okay? So originally, a lot of the information that was being shared was the result of scientific projects and scientific works, and also things like military projects and government organisations. But the networks are designed just to share stuff quickly and easily, and to be resilient if there are problems with the network. So it doesn't distinguish between somebody saving a Word document that contains information about a life-saving vaccination, or somebody who saved a document which contains an image of a so-called revenge porn victim. The systems don't particularly care about that, and the systems are not particularly good at dealing with that kind of thing. And indeed, one of the things that we'll look at, and as we look at aspects of social media, for example, is that, again, from a technical point of view, the systems are really good at sharing information, amplifying things. But there's a downside to that if what they're sharing, enabling the sharing of, and what they're good at amplifying is kind of negative social information as well as kind of positive information. Okay, and they're designed to scale things up and share this very quickly and easily. It then becomes difficult sometimes for politicians to understand, well, why can't they just check the videos that have been uploaded? Why can't they just check the images that have been uploaded? But when you get a sense of how many millions of images are uploaded every day, and how many thousands of hours of videos are uploaded every day, okay, then it's very difficult to employ people to look at those. Very difficult to employ people to look at those videos and images, or to listen to messages, or to read through text. So one response is, while they do employ human moderators, okay, so that people can flag up things. So Facebook employs moderators, for example. They work long hours and they look at lots of distressing, disturbing material that's been flagged up. You can try to use systems which will allow you to do it as well. It's very difficult. So when politicians are amongst those groups of people who can help initiate legal changes, okay, and shape societal responses, kind of going, well, why can't these big platforms control it? It's often because they have no real sense of the sheer scale of it. But as I said, behind the technology there's people, okay, and so that's really important that we keep remembering those people and treating them where we can as individuals. Now, we will fall into kind of collective groups occasionally where we've got certain sets of characteristics about us that may allow us to be assigned to certain groups, but at the end of the day we're all individuals. Yeah? And here we've got a couple of stock images of people looking very happy using their mobile phones. Mobile phones are a good example of this, where again we've moved away from perhaps being concentrated around a desktop computer or a laptop computer to the fact that, especially with social media, okay, they've often got their own apps and stuff that are optimized for things like mobile phone use. And this again has implications in terms of criminology and victimology, not just because of how we can communicate, but because of things like location services. So this is just a little introductory segment to just remind you of some of the key characteristics of the module, and to think about where social media fits into this. So we're really interested in social media platforms, social networking platforms, because a lot of people use them. And if you've got a lot of people there, that meets the requirement for crimes to take place, because we need there to be people for there to be perpetrators and for there to be victims. Okay? And then something else we'll go on to consider is the impact of those crimes. So when we look at the impact of the crimes, we're thinking, is there a big impact upon individuals? And are large numbers of individuals affected? So if you've got a crime which may not be numerically very prevalent, but has a big impact on victims, then we're very interested in it. If you've got a crime that's numerically very prevalent, even if the impact is moderate, then we're interested. And where, and this is where the platforms come in, where you've perhaps got a combination of the two, where you've got crimes that are both prevalent and highly impactful, and this is one of the unintended consequences of the data sharing and the communication systems that we're all engaged with using, okay, then as criminologists we are very interested in that, because that's where we'll find a focal point for the high-tech crimes that we're interested in. And because of those implications about it being an international network, and because it reaches, the technology reaches across lots of jurisdictions and boundaries, okay, because we can't necessarily see it very easily in action, it's got all kinds of implications again for policing and for the criminal justice system. How do traditional location-based police forces deal with crimes that are not necessarily location-based? Okay, ultimately there will be a location of a victim, there will be a local victim, and ultimately there will be a location of criminals, of perpetrators of the crimes. But that location is kind of mitigated and diffused and anonymized and hidden by the systems, or is potentially. And then how, in terms of a criminal justice system, how do we cope with this, where crimes are being committed now in very large numbers by people who can effectively reach out across international boundaries, international legal jurisdictions, thanks to the technology. At one time, transnational crime was a relatively rare thing because it took organised networks, and it was unusual in individuals who had the ability to travel around the world to commit these crimes, because they had to be done often in person, perhaps with some reach out through mail systems and stuff like that, okay? But it was really quite limited. Now, we're all walking around with the ability to take out a phone and to reach out to people and do something positive or do something negative, even something criminal, okay? Reaching out from our phone across all these international jurisdictions, across these boundaries. So again, how is this thing policed? What are the responses of the criminal justice system to this? And this is something that we'll look at as a common theme. Okay, so changing practices lead to changing criminal practices, which means that there aren't always laws in place to be able to say that something is illegal. We may consider something to be a really poor social practice, something unethical, something immoral, something downright bad, for want of a better expression, but it may not actually be illegal. Okay, so one of the things that we'll see throughout the module is the race of the criminal justice system, and we'll look at specific examples to catch up with behaviour in practice.